connected internationally.
That's right.
In so many ways.
Yeah, and
a lot of
no, go on. It just gave me an image of the international protests that we've had these last few weeks as well. Yes. Yeah. No, I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go on.
5,000 people came out in the middle of Amsterdam to protest. What's a shame about that is that they weren't social distancing, but 5,000 people came out just in the city of Amsterdam in Europe.
It's just absolutely beautiful. Aside from COVID, yes, absolutely beautiful. Yeah. Absolutely beautiful.
So, and I think that this is an inflection point. I think this is a critical moment. A lot of people I'm working with, particularly people who are working or on the front lines of racial justice work and economic and gender justice work, is it feels like this is different. And I think that maybe COVID was the defibrillator. Wow. That being forced to be at home for 3 months and shake up all of our patterns and wake us up out of our sleep to what is really going on.
Yes.
And that we're hungry, and that there are people who are hungry, and that there are people who don't have work.
Literally. That's right.
And so that's waking us up in a deeper way. It's a tragic thing, but this feels different, and this is the moment. So the work that I've done around the world has, I've worked with, using this work, I've been blessed to be able to work with incarcerated men in a California state prison. I've been able to work with severely wounded combat veterans.
Yes.
Working with racial justice, social justice work, economic justice. And one of the things I'm continuing to do is working in the Middle East with many different women's rights organizations to address gender justice. I created a program that basically trains men to go in Gaza, in Gaza, to go back into their communities, these men, to go back to their communities to train men how to stop beating their wives.
It's just such powerful work, and I've had the privilege to, hear about your work and what you'd been doing when you went into Gaza to do this. I just thought it was amazing, and for you to experience that has to have been life-changing.
It was. Again, that's a deeper level of realizing, wow, my truth does not equal that truth. That the way I see the world is different. And I learned a lot about, and that's what's informing this work, Fear Civility, and what's informing how I'm trying to support people at this time is because the whole philosophy I went with is that for things, that there's a difference between change and transition. Change is just radical change. There's a new policy, or there's a new regime, or a new administration, or there's a divorce, or something like that. But the transition is all the psychological aspects of that. And we each have our own relationship with cycling through the patterns of, I forget who that is. I think it's Kubler-Ross with the different stages of death.
Grief, yes. Grief, yeah.
We go through cycles with that. And again, each one of us, based on our history with change, transition, with trauma, with our attachments to things, are going to go through them more easily or not.
My mind just went back to, because I know that you were out there. I have not been in any of the protests. And you really had a sense of things being different this time, and that is the hope, right? I mean, when we go through something that's been, that's as difficult as this has been the last 2 weeks, hope is, it's the thing that we hold to. Some people would call it their faith. Their hope and faith are closely aligned. That everything will be all right. I mean, we tend to, that's a kind of part of our resilience, isn't it? And and so I too feel that this is different, and I love what you said in the backdrop of COVID, that somehow that, I think the way I would say it is the stage got set, and so that this can play out in the way that it hopefully should. And that I also think that because we are confined with COVID, we're more out than we were, but it's still not the same as it was, that more people were in a position to see it. More people were in a position to not flit around and go to the movies and that kind of thing, maybe, and actually feel it, let themselves feel it.
Yeah.
And, I know I've spoken with individuals over the past 2 weeks, some who didn't feel like they could go to work, had jobs and didn't feel they could go to work, maybe their own personal protest. Others who just felt, I am one of them that felt physically ill last week. and heartbroken, and so it really has affected us viscerally. So it has affected our bodies and certainly our minds, and I think our spirits as well. I mean, and that's where that hope piece comes in. You kind of have to get there, or else you really can't have the energy to play any role in it improving. I mean, hope kind of, fuels that, right? If you don't believe,
I think there's hope, and I love what you say that it's been set. The situation is that COVID has set the stage, and what I hope is that we see it as a blessing and an opportunity, and that we step into it. I think that's really what it is. Yeah. And what takes us to action. So the sphere civility work is about compassion and action. It's that how do you take your well intentions in your head, and how do you get it to the point when with the suffering of others, or the challenges of others, it's not just, poor them or whatever, I'm going to donate a couple of bucks here and there, but really when it hurts your heart, to the point where you actually have, so it's head, heart, and body, right? It starts with an idea. You got to feel it in your heart. And that's what you're saying. That's what I'm hearing you say, is that this has given a chance to get out of numbness and into feeling.
Absolutely.
And now the question is, what's the action?
Sure. And I am encouraged. A number of people have reached out to me to ask, what can I do? I'm saying a number of Caucasian individuals have reached out to me to say, well, what should I be doing? And there's a lot of exchange on social media, different organizations and groups where you can play a role. And I had someone ask me who has young kids, a white woman who has young kids, what should my husband and I do? What should we be doing with them? Because they want to, put into their children the good thing. And I had very specific things that they can do differently. And we ended with, her saying, I would never have thought of that. So the dialogue and the communication between white and black and Muslim and Christian and gay and straight, and I mean, the dialogue is so very important, and you've certainly had the opportunity to have that dialogue, which is wonderful. And many people just don't. I think it's more don't take the opportunity. I think that there's an opportunity every day to learn more if you have the openness of mind and heart to want to know more. I mean, people like to stay closed in their beliefs, and we started off by saying that because it feels safe. If you just hold to what you believe, then that just feels great. But situations like this allow people to kind of say, "Wait a minute, I never thought of myself as a racist, for instance, but did I? This is wait a minute now." And then if I'm not a racist and this has been happening and I haven't been aware, then what makes me not aware? How do I live my life so that I stay unaware? And, and maybe it starts there. Like what adjustments do I need to make in my life so that I'm more aware? But we could say that certainly about crimes that come against gay individuals, and we could certainly say that about crimes that come against Muslims, and just that that there is an element in our humanness that's not pretty. That's not fun to look at. And what people like to have fun. I regularly say that people. I regularly say that and nothing wrong with that per se. But I regularly say that there's so much of life that we as human beings go through just in anxiety management. You sort of look at your actions and it's all about how do I avoid feeling anxious? Because anxiety is pretty noxious, right? It's not a a very comfortable feeling, and so certainly in a time like this where we have civil unrest, it's anxiety provoking, right? If you hear guns and firecrackers, and you live downtown, it makes you feel anxious. If someone can be killed right before your eyes and people can scream for them that they're dying, get off of him. and it still can happen. That makes us anxious. COVID makes us anxious. I mean, so it's, I know for sure, just because of the work that I do, that the anxiety level of the nation is elevated, right?
Right.
And so this podcast today really was about, how we stay well in the midst of that. What we do with ourselves individually and within our families and within the community to stay well. And so one of those things is, talking to other people, right? And opening your mind and talking to other people, and at least listening to other people's opinions and beliefs. The other is attending to your family and the ways that you're raising your children and what they think and what they believe. The other is self-care, making sure to, in the midst of it, because we are traumatized, to take care of oneself. I press this all the time, but, every day, what is the good thing you're going to do for yourself? And you spoke some to that, really taking the time to look in at yourself. And that is not something that we as human beings are really good at, just sit with yourself. Go on. I'm sorry.
That's what I noticed, that, the work, particularly with the program I developed for these women's rights organizations in the Middle East, is what brings about lasting change, right? What brings about transformation. Transformation is different from change, as I was saying. Right. Transformation is a slow process of evolving into something, and that's what creates lasting change. And what I came to was that no one is going to transform their viewpoints, habits, patterns, or tendencies if there's not first some level of safety and trust.
Yes.
And you know that from your work. Yeah. And I think, and so if there's anything we can do for people who are struggling, is when we approach them in conversation to maybe challenge their viewpoints, is to make sure you create a safe space for them. I'm not saying for everyone, and I'm talking mostly probably to my white brothers, sisters, and siblings. Is if you're talking to other white people, is to create a and the work that I did, going back to your point, particularly that I learned working with the severely wounded combat veterans and working with PTSD, is helping them to get back to themselves and get back to their power, and to not put that loaded gun in their mouth every night wondering if they're going to shoot them. And you know this, you work with them as well.
Very, very much, yes.
And that a lot of that had to do with isolation and withdrawal, which are, as you know, symptoms, the emotional symptoms of trauma and compounded stress is withdrawal and isolation. And that's something that I'm concerned about at this moment.
Yeah.
But what I was able to help them with was to get them to the point where they can listen and connect with their nervous system enough that they can begin again to feel the difference between what's uncomfortable and what's unsafe.
Yeah.
And that the nervous system doesn't know the difference. It's basically set up, the autonomic nervous system, as you know, is basically set up to make sure you don't get eaten by a hungry tiger. That's why it was developed.
That's right, protection.
Yeah, and it doesn't understand modern stressors. It doesn't understand your boss saying to you, hey, we got to sit down and have a talk. Your body's going to have an uncomfortable experience, and the whole system's going to interpret that as hungry tiger.
That's right.
Unless you take the moment to slow it down enough to really listen.
And that's why, that's why, I mean, these things come with practice, right? I mean, that's why it's so important in times like these where we have to slow down because of COVID-19, to take that time with yourself. That's exactly what I'm getting at. And because, of course, if you don't practice that, it's not going to happen when you need it most. When you're having that confrontation.
And that's what I think is playing out now, as you were alluding to, is that we're uncomfortable, and we should be uncomfortable. Things are transforming. But we have to, but my concern, and I think that's what you were saying, is that we don't instantly go into an automatic state of feeling uncomfortable. That must mean unsafe.
Right.
And because it's in those moments, why do we have arguments and fights? It's usually that reason, is that we're going to have an uncomfortable situation, or you get triggered, and the automatic response of the nervous system is to go into unsafe when it's just simply uncomfortable.
Right. And so I'm going to either engage non-respectfully or I'm going to shut down. which then does not propagate the conversation